They are the strong arm of the law. Shadowy figures who are armed and ready to take on the most dangerous criminals.
It is an elite squad, there's no doubt about it. A lot of what the AOS do probably goes unrecognised or unheard of.
They've been stopped by members of the Armed Defenders Squad!
The story of this elite squad has gone untold until now. Over the next 3 weeks, an exclusive first look behind the masks of the Police Armed Offenders Squad.
You get about half a second to decide what you're going to do.
It was really frightening.
And anybody who says that they're not frightened is full bullshit.
Tonight we take you inside the cordon, right alongside New Zealand's AOS, from their dramatic origins to the modern cutting edge.
I never in my wildest dreams thought that the New Zealand Police had any sort of capability like this.
You know, if you pull the trigger, your life is never, ever going to be the same.
You'll see for the first time through the eyes of the men and women who put themselves in the line of fire. Members of the modern Armed Offenders Squad are highly trained and highly equipped. But the M4 semi-automatic rifles and Glock pistols, the ballistic helmets and body armour worn today are nothing like the old days. In the 1960s, police packing so much firepower was unthinkable. New Zealand was a country where the pubs closed at 6, doors were left unlocked and firearms were only for deer cullers and duck shooters.
Firearms and crimes was the most unusual event, really.
We were so proud to be an unarmed force.
You very rarely needed a gun. If you wanted protection, you just put on the uniform and you were safe.
But in the summer of 1964, the country was rocked when 4 policemen were shot and killed in a single month in the line of duty. The police needed to combat the rising tide of violent crime, so a special squad was formed to deal with armed and dangerous offenders. Roger Gargett was a founding member.
The Police Armed Defenders Squad was issued with old army-type battle dress, which was dyed black. We had the SMLE 303 calibre rifles and the 38 Smith & Wesson revolvers. These were generally dated around about 1942, I remember.
Squad members were regular policemen. Some were ex-military, but now their rules of engagement would be very different.
It was always impressed on us that we must obtain our objectives with a minimum of force, and that was drilled into us incessantly.
Their instructions were explicit: cordon, contain and appeal. Cordon meant creating a physical line that the offender must not pass. Contain, keeping the offender inside that area. And appeal meant communicating with them to give up. For the first few years of operations, everything went to plan. Incidents were resolved without a shot being fired. But when things went badly wrong, suddenly the squad were thrown into the spotlight.
I'd known Glenn Saw for some years when he was a juvenile, committing all sorts of crimes around Karori. And I'd got to know him pretty well, really. I mean, I was a young trainee detective, sort of developed a rapport with him.
Colin Lyons was on a day off in April 1970 when the phone rang.
At about 8:30, I got this phone call at home to say that Glenn Saw had abducted a woman at gunpoint.
Because of his history with Glenn Saw, Lyons was called in to help search for the kidnapper. On a hunch, Lyons headed up the gravel track to Wrights Hill in Karori, where he knew Glenn Saw liked to hang out.
And as we went into a bend, Glenn Saw appeared in her headlights from our right. He came down off a bank. In his right hand, he had a sort of shotgun.
Get out of the fucking car!
His left hand, he was holding his female hostage and a rifle.
Just calm down. Put the gun on the ground.
Glenn Saw was screaming at us. He was going to shoot us, and to put her hands up. And I started talking to him. I told him who it was. Talked to him by his first name.
On the ground! Back off!
It was crazy. Both Glensaw and this hostage were yelling and screaming.
Don't come any closer! I'll fucking shoot
He
you!
had the girl up at one stage, the rifle right up under her chin, was pushing her chin up.
Oh! And then
And then he said, I'm going to shoot you. He said, I'm going to count to 5. I'm going to shoot you.
five! And then I'm gonna shoot you! One!
And he got to 2, before 3. We leapt into the gorse, and just after we leapt into the gorse, there's a shot fire. You know, we didn't know whether he was shooting at us or what had happened.
While Colin Lyons and his partner hid from Glensaw and tried to raise help, the armed offenders squad was being mobilised.
The Nelson section came across to Wellington. The Wanganui section came down, Palmerston North came down, so we had quite a big team.
But Glensaw and his hostage had vanished. By sunup, Colin had dusted himself off and made his way to the search HQ nearby.
There was actually a base set up in Karori at the sports ground, and there was a major operation going on.
There was a great deal of danger in the situation. There was no doubt about that at all. And nobody doubted that it would end with a killing of either Glensaw or Glensaw and a number of other people.
Sometime late evening, it had been established that he was in his own house.
Glensaw, this is the police.
And so the armed offenders squad had it caught and contained. And they were making phone calls to him and appeals by loud hailer to him.
I was in the front of the patrol that went up Garden Road to surround the house.
I got this message from people in the cordon that he was calling out from the house for me. I said to my wife as I left her home that day, I said, I'm sure somebody will die today. Yeah, little did I know that it could have been me.
Bruce? Look, Bruce, it's me, it's Colin.
His fingerprints have been identified at a sports shop where a lot of firearms had been stolen. So we knew he had these firearms. When I first spoke to him, he was pretty calm. And we had quite a long conversation, you know, about a quarter of an hour conversation. You know, I was trying to talk him into surrendering and give himself up. And he wanted to know what was going to happen to him if he surrendered. He was frightened of coming out of the house and being shot.
Now look, I don't want to hurt anyone.
And I assured him that he wouldn't be shot. But because by this time he had 2 hostages in the house. He had the girl, which he'd taken at gunpoint.
Fucking kill her, okay?
And he had a boarder living in the house, and the boarder had been at work and had come home, not knowing of the drama. Well, he made it quite clear, not only to me on the phone and to other people he'd talked to early in the day, that he wanted to die. And that he had gone too far and he couldn't see any way out of it. And before he left his house, he left a note for his wife. And the note reads such that he wasn't coming back. His final words were to me, I want to die and I'm going now. And he hung up. What he had said and the fact that he was going to leave the house was relayed to the armed offender squad.
Graham Wilkes was near the bottom of Garden Road as a heavily armed man and his hostages walked toward him.
I saw 3 persons, one with armed, firing across his shoulder, coming down. It was Glensaw, and he called out to me and said, if you point that bloody thing at me, I'll shoot her. And we passed within 10 feet.
I decided to leave the Karori base and go down towards Garden Road because I thought, you know, possibly if I was there, I might be able to talk to him some more.
For 2 days, the police armed offenders squad had been scouring the western suburbs of Wellington, searching for Bruce Glensaw, who'd abducted a young woman at gunpoint. Detective Colin Lyons had been negotiating with Glensaw over the phone, but the gunman had taken to the street with his weapons and hostages. While Colin raced the 5-minute journey from Karori to Garden Road, squad member Graham Wilkes was face to face with the armed man.
We were on a grass verge. There was a few trees, and we had 30 metres clear view of him, and he pulled the pistol out and he turned around to a dog handler who was advancing on him and said, "I'm going to shoot you too." And as he swung out and aimed the pistol, we both went down in a kneeling position, and he was quicker than I was. Glensaw hit the ground, and that was it.
But he died before I got there. He was shot.
So when I arrived in Glenmore Street, he was
Dead on the street.
At the time he was shot, there were actually 3 guns trained on him, but only 1 gun went off. And I know that the officer from my discussions with him, and that was the thing that affected him greatly later on. Did he do the right thing? Why didn't the others shoot? Why didn't 3 guns go off?
I was not quick enough, clearly, but as close as I'd ever want to be.
Is this the first time the Armed Defenders Squad has shot anyone?
I believe it is. I'm sorry to say, I believe it is.
I have absolutely no doubt from being involved in that operation over a period of 3 days that the officer who did the correct thing was the officer who pulled the trigger. I knew young Glensaw. I liked Glensaw. He's a lovely kid. He was disturbed, but he was a lovely kid. And I was very sad when he was shot, but it was just unavoidable.
An official police report found the shooting justified. But the incident highlighted the fact that all squad members had to know exactly when they could shoot and when they couldn't. There are explicit police instructions which say the Armed Offenders Squad can shoot only if they fear death or grievous bodily harm to themselves or others.
General instruction F61 applies. That means
the fire orders set up back in those early days are still the instructions that guide the Armed Offenders Squad today.
They are our substance, the principles upon which we operate when we draw firearms.
if you cannot protect yourselves or others in a less violent manner, the offender may be shot.
Members are briefed in them on every deployment, either once or on several occasions. And the key ingredient is that they're not just special for armed offenders, for any incident where a member of the police draws a firearm.
But putting this theory into practice is never easy. Deciding whether to take a life, even if justified in order to protect others, is one of the hardest decisions faced by squad members of any era.
We knew he was armed. He'd been telling the police operator on the phone that he was going to kill the woman, kill the baby, kill himself.
Police! Don't move! Don't move!
And he was in the back of the car, he had a swan dry covering the shotgun, and he was sort of moving around. The person behind me in the passenger seat, I heard his safety catch come off as well. I had no doubt that I was going to shoot him or be forced to shoot him in those circumstances. But for my own peace of mind, I couldn't see the firearm. It brought you right to the edge, and it was that time to make a decision. I just thought, yep, I'm going to have to shoot this person, and in my mind, I'd worked out how I was going to do it. Shooting through the window, I was going to fire 2 quick shots, one to break the window and the other one hopefully to incapacitate the offender. But I couldn't see the firearm, and so in my own mind, wasn't prepared to fire the shot. The good thing was, I guess, that the person behind me in the passenger seat had done exactly the same thing, and in his decision making, he'd decided that he wasn't prepared to shoot him as well.
It freaked him out a wee bit, I think, how close he actually came to pulling the trigger. So he talked about that a lot when he came home from that job, and we talked about the possibility of it happening, and we always concluded it was way better for him to be the one to pull the trigger than for him to be a victim and for it to happen the other way.
He gave up in the end and came out, and it was a good result for the police, and it was a good result for him and the victim. It could easily have gone the other way, and almost did.
In 1974, the Armed Offenders Squad were pushed to new extremes in a 10-day manhunt through deep bush on the trail of a convicted killer who'd escaped custody. This was one of the first operations where tracking dogs were available to the AOS. The dogs revolutionised the squad's approach to dangerous call-outs. For police dog handler Murray Morrissey, it was his first AOS call-out.
1 o'clock in the morning, we received a call to say that another car had been abandoned way up in the north, a place called Mangamuka. And we were to dispatch ourselves there with the Armed Offender Squad to search for him. So it started from there.
When we took off on the call-out, we had our usual uniform issue with us, but we didn't have an overnight bag or overnight gear because you didn't know where you were going, how long you were going for. So we lived in the same gear for about a week.
Well, I certainly arrived without any weapons, but in fact, I didn't even have a decent uniform. I arrived here with a pair of baller suit overalls, ill-fitting, may I say, and a cream-coloured polo neck long-sleeve jersey, which, you know, for the cold. And of course, when they saw me front up with this on the night patrol, they were aghast. You know, get that man out of here, get him a black jersey from somewhere, you know. So I had to borrow one from an Armed Offender Squad member who had 3. And he lent me one for the duration of the search.
Bush searches, tracking, covert entries into buildings, assaulting buildings where we thought he might be.
You got your tracking harness in your left hand, and you got your gun in your right hand, you see. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this sort of thing, but my hand, I tell you, was just physically shaking. That gun was just utterly shaking, you know, and my knees were shaking. Because I thought this guy could just pop out of the bush and just shoot us.
But the trail went cold. The men returned to base safe, although empty-handed.
And in the end, he broke a road check and ended up in one of the towns up there.
He came into Kawakawa. We'd shifted our base into Kawakawa. In fact, we were sleeping in the hotel. Fantastic. Sleeping in a bed. And I tell you what, we were buggered, I can tell you. He'd come in to break into some shops, of course, get some supplies. And the local bread delivery man had seen him and disturbed him. And of course, he went running off down the street towards the hotel. We were all sleeping upstairs. So, of course, we were rallied from our rooms and we formed up outside and went over to an area where we were told he had run. And Graham Endicott Davies, with the dog Fritz, he began tracking. Behind the hotel is a rubbish dump where all bodies of cars were thrown and all overgrown. I was behind with another squad, and as Graham approached the car bodies, he came to this one particular car body. This person stood up in front of him and pointed the gun right at him and says, "Fuck off or I'll shoot you." "Fuck off or I'll shoot you!" Well, I mean to say, that would scare the shit out of any man, wouldn't it? So, of course, Graham's dog leaped at him, but his tracking line got caught in the car body. His dog stopped it that far away from him.
The offender raised his gun again.
The offender was loading a live round into the breech and was having a wee bit of a problem with it. At first we thought we were going to have to do the business.
And I was behind, so of course I let my dog go mead. We raced forward and he was right in his element there. We couldn't go anywhere else, so we got him. You know, after 10 days of chasing this guy, we hit him.
It was operations like this that cemented the place of dog handlers in the Armed Offenders Squad. Fortunately, in the early 70s, AOS incidents were still uncommon. But when the call-outs came, there was no warning. Even today, the life of every squad member and their family is ruled by the chance of a call-out, day or night.
Sometimes it might be a couple of hours. Other times, you know, like I say, I've been away 14 days.
You reach an understanding that when the pager goes and I'm needed, I'm gone, and I'll be home when the job's done.
Always in the back of your mind, you're thinking, what are you going to do? What's your plan if there's a call out? You know, can I dump the family here and take the car and go, or can I get a ride with someone else, or do we take 2 cars, or how do we cope with it?
At times I was really envious. I mean, it's fantastic. The pager goes, you go. He just got up and left. Whatever we were doing or wherever we were, or if the kids were upset, he just left. And yeah, I'd love to just get up and go sometimes and leave the family behind for a few days.
One of our daughters, Sammy, as she got a bit older and a bit more aware of things, she would often burst. As soon as a pager would go off, she'd start crying, she'd burst into tears, and because our dad would be off and gone, she didn't know when I'd be coming back. It got a bit heart-wrenching.
If he was ever late and it was after their bedtime and they were all tucked in, he'd always go in and see them and give them a kiss and maybe wake them up. And that was just the sort of dad he was.
The other girls were, my other daughters were okay, you know, they're interested, and they'd ask, oh, what did you do, Dad? And you know, did you catch the baddie and things like that. But for Sammy, it got a bit hard for her.
Kathy was invaluable. You know, you can sort of trace it to her that the kids had as normal life as possible with my two boys. She was the one that took them to sports every Saturday. She was the one that looked after them, made sure they had all the right equipment.
During the weekends, you know, things that we perhaps had planned.
10 minutes.
And again, he couldn't make it.
Hey, mate, sorry, we're going to have to go fishing tomorrow, okay?
See you, mate. Of course, later on, they found out personally what went on. They both obviously joined the team.
And it's not until you're part of the squad yourself, and yeah, the same things are playing out. You know, you put the phone down, or you take that moment and you think to yourself, yeah, I know what it was like for Mum back then, or I understand how the kids feel at times.
Because every time a squad member heads off to work, there's a chance they won't be coming home. For squad members, voice appeal is their first and best weapon. Negotiating a peaceful surrender is always the goal.
The police officer will do anything rather than shoot somebody.
Taff Jones found himself doing some fast talking when he came face to face with an armed man in Wellington.
There was a young guy, and we had a description, was firing a handgun in the air as he was walking down the street. And I was just wandering down the street. I was just by myself. This guy came round, so we were facing each other, probably about a metre apart.
Oh, whoa, don't, no.
And it was a typical sort of, you know, gunfight that the OK could call out, because his hand went for the gun, and I was screaming at him and saying, you know, now leave it, you know, don't touch it. And then I was bringing my gun out. You know, when people say it's all in slow motion, it really is. Even now, I can close my eyes and actually see the sort of gun coming out, and I was screaming at him.
Leave it! Leave it! Don't touch it! Leave it! Don't touch it! Put it down!
And it turned out to be an air gun. Just imagine what would have happened if I'd shot that guy.
That gun may have been a toy.
Get out of the car! Put your hands up!
But police must treat every AOS call-out as a potentially deadly situation. A negotiation could go either way, something that Colin Lyons knew firsthand.
Bruce! Put it down, Bruce!
Colin had spent hours trying to convince young Bruce Glensaw to surrender, but to no avail. When he was confronted with another armed and dangerous man a few years later, Colin was determined that this time it would end differently.
He'd gone into a sports shop in Mercer Street, opposite the Evening Post building. He was shown this gun. He grabbed the gun, grabbed some ammunition, and ran out of the building.
Loaded the rifle, walked across the road and up into the Evening Post building to find his estranged wife.
The man's wife was not there. Staff fled and the police were called. Colin Lyons entered the building and began a tense negotiation, face to face with the desperate man.
The Evening Post building was in Willow Street, a hub of the city, a lot of foot traffic, a lot of motor traffic. A shot had been fired. He was telling us that he wanted to die and that he wanted the police to shoot him, and he'd be quite aggravated and threatening and pacing up and down. And then he would sort of calm down and we'd say to him, well, can you point the rifle away somewhere else? And he would.
I was down Willow Street, lying in a doorway as a cover position in case he attempted to leave the building and come out onto Willow Street.
From where he was in this room, he could see out and he could see a reflection in a shop window across the road. He could see the policeman going up and down, and he said at one stage that the next policeman that walked by, he was going to shoot him.
There was a senior policeman came along, come for a look. He shouldn't have been inside the cordon, but he was. And I grabbed him and he said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And I said, "Well, sir, you go ahead and walk up there." But I said, "That man in the building just said the next person he sees come, he's going to shoot." And he bailed out, obviously.
Over the next 4 hours, we talked to him. You know, I got talking about fishing and boating and all sorts of things. I mean, there was someone you could talk to, and eventually, if we kept talking to him, I had this feeling that it would be all right. And that's how it turned out to be.
Several hours later, with no further shots fired, Colin Lyons and the offender left the building peacefully. This negotiation led to a lifelong friendship between the two. Whether face-to-face or via loud hailer, the key to negotiation is establishing rapport.
New Zealanders, male and female, don't like to be pushed in a corner. And, you know, they become quite staunch. They don't like to back down. And so, you know, part of the negotiation was really to create a sort of a non-threatening environment where they didn't actually have to feel like they had to be staunch. They weren't going to lose a huge amount of face.
The three main offenders you'd deal with are the crazies, the crusaders, and the crims. And a crim was always easier to deal with than somebody that's on a crusade that thinks they're right. The crazies, you just never know what they're going to do next.
Graham Wilkes knows that negotiation is a delicate business, a high-stakes game of give and take that he can't afford to lose.
He'd smashed the place up, smashed the windows, and the police were called. And on their arrival, he grabbed a large slither of glass, well over a foot long, and he held it to one of the kids' throats.
It's your baby. You don't want to get your baby. I'll give you that. I want nothing!
During the course of the negotiation, he would come to the window with one of the babies in his arms and this big slither of glass and threaten them with physical violence. We couldn't use CS gas because it would have affected the kids. So I lit up a cigarette and I could see he was a smoker. So the negotiations went around whether he'd want to smoke or not.
I need you to put the baby down and give you a cigarette. All right.
And so I said, all right, I'll give you a cigarette. I said, you're going to have to put down the baby, which he did. So I lit the cigarette and I gingerly handed it to him. And he had to lean right out the window, one hand with the glass and the slither of glass like that, and reach right out on his tiptoes. As soon as I had him in that position, the boys kicked the door and took him out, and game over. We used time, good negotiation skills, and it was a successful operation.
Being within spitting distance of armed offenders wasn't a great idea. A megaphone, or even better, a telephone, would keep the police a safe distance, or at least slightly safer.
It was a pretty dangerous job, believe it or not. A couple of the megaphones, obviously they gave away your position of where the voice was coming from to the offender, and one or two of the megaphones ended up with bullet holes in them, so you didn't hold them like you see in the movies, didn't hold them to your face and talk, obviously. We had long leads on them, and you put the megaphone to one side of you.
As the number of call-outs increased, the value of good negotiating became ever more important. In the 1980s, specialised police negotiation teams were established.
Part of the skills we equipped them with was to assess where the subject is. Are they distressed? Are they suicidal? Are they boozed? Now, all this information is of great use to the tactical response, because then you're getting some idea, hey, who am I dealing with here? Where's this guy coming from?
The arrival of the new PNTs caused friction at first.
They gave us a fair bit of stick to start with, and, you know, you think you can fix this, and, you know, we're the expert, you know, that sort of ribbing.
We used to sort of take the piss out of them a bit and basically say they're only there to carry our kit. We got that much gear to carry now, that's why you guys have arrived on the scene to sort of help us carry our gear out, and then you can go and have tea and coffee or whatever you do until we sort the job out.
One particular incident that I can remember was a male who really just started to play games with the female negotiator.
I mean, this was just one guy who didn't want to talk and hated cops and particularly hated females, so he just liked flinging his power around, and he was just one of those kind of guys.
But I was sitting there and I was starting to get really irritated, you know, with listening to what was going on. But, you know, she talked her way through that.
I think on that particular call-out there were only 3 of us and 2 of us were women, so one of us had to go and then the other one had to go, and you just, you know, turn the other cheek and keep taking it.
You know, you're the focal point, you know, for all the things that have actually happened in their lives. Sometimes almost like, you know, you're the catalyst for why they're there. You know, you're captive.
A successful negotiation often comes down to listening as much as talking, as Derek Webb learned early on.
If you really listen to people, people under stress, they will usually indicate in some way of their intentions.
Webb had arrived with his squad to a domestic at an Auckland house.
When we arrived on the scene, the offender was actually out of the house with a shotgun and moving around.
What's it done, mate? Oi, get off my property! All right, calm down, calm down. What's the story? Fucking, she's my wife. I could beat her if I wanted.
He was making some threatening gestures, but at the same time, just during part of his conversation, he said,
I left the kettle on.
I've left the kettle boiling in the house. And that was an indication to me he was looking for a way out.
What are we all doing standing out here in the cold? Why don't you go inside and make us all a cuppa, yeah? Come on then, milk and tea.
So I said to him at that stage, well, what the hell are we doing here? Why don't we go and have a cup of tea? Just put the firearm down, we're going to have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And that actually happened.
Got me what?
He put the firearm down, we went and had a cup of tea. 15 minutes later, he was on his way to jail.
But while some offenders surrender peacefully, the few that are hell-bent on self-destruction push the squads to their limits with deadly results.
Get on the ground now! I'm police! On the ground! Holding one! Please don't move! Get on the ground! Do it now! I'm police! On the ground!
For armed offender squad members, an ordinary day at the office can mean facing off against heavily armed criminals. And in life or death situations, feeling fear can be a means of survival.
Holding one!
Definitely you feel fear, but it's harnessing that fear. It's harnessing the, I suppose, the adrenaline that starts pumping and channel it into a positive for yourself. Your vision becomes acute, your hearing becomes acute, your feelings become acute, and you're very much focused into the situation. So there's fear there, and anybody who says that they're not frightened is full of bullshit.
Ken Foreman knows what it means to feel fear. He and his West Coast squad were chasing an armed and dangerous criminal late at night. Chris Lewis was wanted for a string of armed offences around the country and was now fleeing from police through the Buller Gorge.
I think it was about the second corner into the Buller Gorge. We noticed some marks on the road where he'd hit the bank and gone down over the side. And the problem was that it was like a vertical bank. Somebody had to be lowered down over the bank to this vehicle. One guy couldn't go down on his own safely, so there had to be 2. And I don't know why, to this day, but I volunteered. So they roped us up, and it was in a place where we couldn't set up any lighting down onto this vehicle. So it was over you go, with a torch in one hand and a pistol in the other. And one of the ropes wasn't long enough to reach the bottom, and that was the rope that I was hooked to. So I'm dangling there, my feet aren't touching the ground, and Fitzy, his rope did reach the ground. He had to sort of untie himself and go forward and check the vehicle. All I said to him was, if he's there and he fires, just hit the ground, because I'm going to empty this in that direction. And yeah, he was no longer there. He'd shot through. That was when I found out why we actually tuck the bottoms of our trousers into our boots, so that if you do crap yourself, it doesn't run down all over your boots. But yeah, I'd be a liar if I said at the time I wasn't terrified.
For squad members, the fear comes not only from facing dangerous offenders, but from having a very good idea of just how much damage a bullet can do.
I don't think probably the general public as such probably do realise how dangerous firearms are. A guy had split up from his girlfriend, went to an address, walked down the side of the house and fired a shot from a .303 rifle. The woman was laying on the bed and the first shot just skimmed her heel, just broke the skin, and the new boyfriend jumped out of bed and was actually heading out of the bedroom through the door when he fired a second shot. Hit him in the back, exited his stomach. His flatmates actually put a pillow across his stomach and sat astride it, holding everything in place, and the ambulance arrived and he survived that. But the most interesting thing was how far that projectile travelled. It went through him, it went through the door jamb of this old 20s wooden house. Hanging in the passageway was the Hamilton phone book, which was quite thick, hanging on a string, and the bullet went through that, went through the wall, through the pantry, through all the food. And then the upsweep of the sink, which was stainless steel, it went through that. It actually went through the house. The round went through the wooden fence into the neighbour's house and into the lounge, through a lazy boy, which the occupant had been sitting in some minutes previously, as he'd heard the noise and apparently got up to go and see what the noise was. And the round actually was embedded in the wall of the house at the neighbours. So there was a real insight into how dangerous firearms are and how far they will travel.
Many people believe that when they are forced to fire, the highly trained marksmen of the squads would shoot to wound, not to kill. But in 1975, a call-out in Christchurch City brought this issue to very public attention. The squad were called out when psychiatric patient Edward Ross threatened to stab and kill his young daughter.
Stay back! Stay back! I'll do it!
This was a crazed man, and he had his daughter up on the window, and he was starting to thrust the knife into the daughter's back.
An officer had a rifle on Ross and kept it on him. And when he attempted to put the knife into his daughter, he couldn't pull the trigger. Another officer took the rifle off.
Decisive action was taken in seconds, but it caused an outcry. Why hadn't the officer simply shot to wound? Was Ross's death absolutely necessary? The officer's actions saved the little girl's life, but it was apparent that the public believed the AOS were too ready to pull the trigger, as if that alone was what they were training for.
I was concerned that armed offender squad members would stop shooting. I was concerned that they would be so confused in their minds about what their liability and what their responsibilities were, that they wouldn't be able to do their job.
Former police officer, now a prominent lawyer, Rob Moody wrote a paper to address what he considered to be an unfair and undue burden on police officers.
The police commissioners were always talking about, we don't shoot to kill, we shoot to wound. And in Ross's case, the only target he really had was the offender's head. And of course, you can't shoot from some distance away. Shoot somebody in the head and say, well, I was only shooting to wound. So it seemed to me, and it had always seemed to me, that there was a much better formula than that.
In March 1976, Moody coins a new phrase. Members of the Armed Offenders Squad shoot not to wound, not to kill, but simply to achieve the instantaneous and complete elimination of the offender's capacity to kill or seriously injure others.
Our key mission is to resolve the incident in the safest manner in which we can. Shooting is essentially a last resort. When we do shoot, it is to incapacitate and remove that threat.
You must be prepared to take that vital step, which is very difficult to decide to take.
What the Armed Offenders Squad member is concerned with is protecting those who are in danger by preventing the person that they're shooting at carrying out the threat of danger to the other person.
If an offender's warranted to be shot, then there is no time to work out, okay, which limb am I going to shoot to stop him. Basically, if you're pulling that trigger, you're there to stop him, full stop.
If you shoot them somewhere where they can still keep going, you haven't really done the job that you're supposed to do, and you put other people at risk.
The way offending has transpired and the use of methamphetamine and other drugs and alcohol even, shooting to wound is just going to piss them off. And you haven't achieved your goal, you haven't rescued the person, you may not have saved your own life.
If a police officer is shooting someone to wound them, he's possibly breaking the law because he's not in fear of his own life. He's not going to shoot to wound if he's in fear of his own life, that's what I'm saying. So every time, it's critical mass, the biggest bit. That's chest.
But even with justification in law, taking another life doesn't come easy, as that Christchurch policeman found out.
Sometime later, his son said to him, "Dad, you've killed a man." And I know that this officer was very upset at this, at the awe and the way it was said. You know, that officer has to live with that for the rest of his life, but he had to do it.
You know, if you pull the trigger, your life is never, ever going to be the same. It's a terrible thing, but that's just the way it is.
Next week, the 1980s bring a call-out in Wellington which puts squads on notice throughout the country. A gunman firing shots in downtown Auckland hospitalises one member of the team.
The tension around that truck, I mean, you could smell it. You knew that the TV cameras were out there filming it and the whole world was watching it.
And the shadowy anti-terrorist squad are tested for the first time in a seaside village called Aramoana.
I thought he'd done a murder-suicide. I was convinced that someone who'd done such horrendous things couldn't live with themselves.
Formed in 1964 in response to escalating violent crime, the Police Armed Offenders Squad is sent to deal with the worst armed criminals.
I thought this guy could just pop out of the bush and just shoot him. My hand, I tell you, was just physically shaking.
Though authorised to use deadly force when their life or that of another is at risk of death or serious injury, most call-outs ended peacefully, with offenders and officers unharmed.
He said, "I've left the kettle boiling in the house." And that was an indication to me he was looking for a way out.
But the squad was forced to fatally shoot their first lawbreaker in 1970.
The officer who did the correct thing was the officer who pulled the trigger.
And would kill 3 more times in that decade.
That officer has to live with that for the rest of his life.
As the 1980s dawned, the squads found themselves under fire from the very public they sought to protect. For many in New Zealand, the 1980s are remembered as a decade of opulence and optimism. But for Murray Forbes, who just joined the Wellington Armed Offenders Squad, it was far from it. In April 1983, Murray's squad was called out after a man fired a shotgun in a crowded bar. What began as a routine job became a turning point for the AOS.
I'll never forget it. Paul Chase shooting, the one in Petone, was the first call out I had.
Paul Chase had fired shots in the hotel the night before. He had gone home. We had information that he needed to be located as quickly as possible. He lived in a block of flats in Petone.
The understanding we had is that it could well have been a gang place. There could have been a lot of people there, you know. And for all we knew, the firearm was still in the building.
Not wanting to wake the whole neighbourhood with a loud hailer, commanders decided to send a team into the building, enter the flat, and recover the firearm as quickly as possible.
It was dark. You had to go through all these stairs and then bang on the door. And we kicked the door in because he could well have had the firearm.
We found that the door had been barricaded, and Paul Chase came out.
Into the darkness of the barricaded corridor appeared a man holding something long and shiny.
What appeared to the officer, a shotgun.
Police, drop it!
We heard the shot and got a call that there was a man down, so we all went forward, and he was this fellow. He was lying there, and I spoke to him. He was fine, you know, so no trouble. We got the ambulance, and within half an hour, we got a call from control and said that this fellow died.
What had appeared to be a shotgun was in fact a steel exercise bar.
The newspaper sort of attacked us, which was probably the right thing to do, you know. Just went on and on. Every day the paper had it for months. And Taff and I, who'd sent the chaps forward, were as much responsible as the man who pulled the trigger, you know.
The public reaction was unprecedented.
New Zealand must not develop a kill first and ask questions later mentality.
Killed for carrying an exercise bar? Once again, the AOS came under intense scrutiny, but support came from the highest office.
If I'd been the policeman, I'd have shot him, frankly. And I think any reasonable person would say exactly that.
After an inquiry, the shooting was found to be justified, but the public outrage put squads on notice throughout the country. And the toll on those officers involved was enormous, even if the impact wasn't visible on the surface.
Men, well, policemen in general, I think in that situation show very little emotion. And that's also very, very scary, you know, that they just bottle it all up.
It was the week after. We went home and we went to see some relations. And we had an auntie there called Auntie Addie. And she said, so you shot my nephew? I said, hey? I didn't know what she was talking about. And she said, yeah, Paul, you shot Paul. And I started explaining it to her. And she was a lovely old woman. She would have been way 70, 80. She was lovely, and she just put an arm around my shoulder and she said, never mind, son. That's a shit. That took a while to go away, you know.
Well, there was no actual need for them to burst into that flat.
What should they have done?
They should have staked the place out and waited until it was broad daylight.
The huge media spotlight on the Paul Chase shooting brought the job into the public eye. And for the wives watching at home who knew their husbands were in the firing line, it made it hard to ignore the very real risks of the role.
You're talking about a split-second decision. Is it my life or his? Yeah, we can sit here and review it.
Waiting for that knock on the door, you know, and you just feared, but I mean, you were busy with, you know, I have the children, so you're busy, but when it was time to come home and he didn't show up, you sort of thought, oh, and wondered why.
It was easier not to know where he was going or what was happening. It's a lot easier if you don't know.
I was worried about the road accidents, that they'd have an accident on the way to a job, or, you know, maybe a job 6-8 hours, get home at 7 in the morning and they've been up all night, that they'd have an accident on the way home.
I was always confident if there was a so-called shootout that he would be the one
in the witness box defending himself rather than the one on the coffin.
I'd get called out 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. It'd be a short job, local job, maybe just one of those domestic type things. I'd be back home by 5:30, hopping to bed, and she wouldn't even know I'd been out, you know, which was wonderful, you know, because it obviously didn't stress her too much because she didn't know about it, you know.
6 months after Paul Chase was shot in Wellington, and while the inquiry was still underway, an incident in downtown Auckland forced the armed offenders squads into the headlines once again.
Joseph Nihana Simpson was the offender in that one. He'd not long been released from prison. He'd gone down to a sports shop that was in QE2 Square to pretend to buy firearms. Threw the owners out, barricaded himself in the shop, and started to fire shots everywhere.
In October 1983, the Armed Offenders Squad was called to deal with prison parolee Joseph Simpson on a shooting spree in downtown Auckland.
On a number of occasions, he came out of the shop with 2 shotguns and was firing them off at random around the place, shop windows and what have you. At that stage, I'd gone through my training and was a dedicated sniper to the team. So I took up a position opposite the sports shop in the Air New Zealand building, as it was there.
I guess this guy should have been shot for what he was doing. But there was an inquiry going on at the time from some other shooting, and everybody was running scared, so there's no way in the world they're going to shoot him. In fact, I heard a squad member say, well, let's shoot him. And the reply from the other one was, well, you shoot him. I'm not going to shoot him. Nowadays, I think they'd blast him to hell and back, and quite rightly, too. Dogs were there, and they were the less violent means. They were going to be the weapons in which to get this guy. The tension around that truck, and I mean, you could smell it. I've never, ever been in a situation, and never ever wished to be in a situation like that again. You knew that the TV cameras were out there watching it, filming it, and the whole world was watching it.
The AOS commander thought it was time for the dogs and sent the dog Luke in.
Well, the dog was released, and bloody disaster.
With Luke shot, 2 more dogs were released.
Dogs in those days had always been taught to run after a moving target. Because Joseph stood still.
The dogs ran past him. They were released and they ran past him now. They just didn't put him down like they were supposed to. It just comes to a standstill. Nothing happens. It seemed like it, was an eternity. Somebody's got to do something.
From my position by the Air New Zealand building, people were screaming to me, he shot the dog, shoot him. He shot the dog, shoot him.
Even amidst all the mayhem, Derek still felt there was a chance to resolve the situation without having to shoot Simpson.
So when he came out of the shop again and I started to engage him in conversations, I saw the shotgun coming up and I ducked behind a concrete pillar and he let a shot go. I actually got a couple of ricochets off the wall in the back of my neck from that. It was building up very, very close to the time where I suppose we were going to have to do something far more serious to stop the situation. Fortunately for him, we could see through our scopes that he never had his finger on the trigger of the shotgun he was carrying.
After several hours of standoff, all hell broke loose. A nearby officer tried to disarm Simpson and failed, but Murray Morrissey saw his chance.
From where I am, I can get to him and drop my pistol as I went, because it was his baggage. I might have been better off doing performing a better tackle, Once it was done, of course, they came from everywhere, and it was all over. My sympathy lies with the handler and Luke, because he was put in an absolutely impossible situation. I've never told anyone before, and it's never ever been written down. But the handler was told by a squad member that next time he comes out, you let the dog go. And if Simpson brings his gun up, I'll shoot him. Now, secure in that knowledge that was going to happen, the dog was released.
Luke received get-well wishes from around the country. He recovered from his injuries and was awarded the Silver Medal for Bravery from the SPCA. But it was really only sheer luck that stopped the incident ending in more carnage than an injured dog. It was a stark reminder of the need to have squad members who stay cool under pressure.
They looked for people who weren't Rambos, who were reliable. They had to be basically level-headed individuals.
There's no room for cowboys on the squad. Cowboys wouldn't exist on the squad because, you know, you need to know that the guys on the squad, you can trust them implicitly with your life because they're the ones that are looking after you.
There wasn't an elitism about it, but there was a trustworthiness that, you know, you would look after the public and members of the police so they could rely on you.
Squad members are relied on to make the right decision in the heat of the moment. And although fire orders warrant them to shoot if they fear death or grievous bodily harm to themselves or others, squad members know that they alone are legally responsible if they use excessive force.
The individual that pulls the trigger is responsible for that action of pulling the trigger. They can't fall back on the fact that I told them to do so. They've got to be able to justify the firing of that shot. This wasn't just a collective squad that, run to the order of the senior officer. This was a group of individuals marshalled together under a management plan that really worked.
The member will weigh up the circumstances as he sees it, and he will apply those fire orders to the scenario as he sees it and understands it, and he will accept responsibility for that act. We accept that there is a burden and responsibility on our staff. In fact, it's a high burden, and to overcome that, I believe anyway, we select the best from within New Zealand Police.
The importance of selecting the right people soon becomes crystal clear when new members find themselves lining up an offender in their gun sights. The ultimate decision, to shoot or not to shoot, is a constant stress point for AOS members.
This 14-year-old kid had run away from over here in Christchurch somewhere. He'd stolen a vehicle which had a couple of loaded firearms in it. He'd gone bush with one or more of the firearms, and we'd put a helicopter up to see if we could spot him through these bush roads. And myself and another guy were lying on a garage roof. We looked through the scope, and here he was with the rifle up, pointing at a helicopter. And it went through my mind. If he pulls the trigger, then I have to. And it doesn't matter what he's done. I'm going to get in deep crap because I've shot a 14-year-old kid. And that's what goes through your mind. Thank God he didn't pull the trigger. I didn't need to. And he got taken out by a police dog.
If you make a mistake, then you're the one who has to face the consequences. So I'd be the one standing in the defendant's box in a courtroom.
If that's what happens, we just have to deal with it, and we have to deal with the fallout and the procedure that obviously you go through in the police if something like that ever happens, and just hope for your sake it never does.
It's either justified and you have a legal defence to it or not. So at the end of the day, it's up to the individual police officer, AOS member who's on the spot, and you have to be justified in law and you have to be responsible for your actions.
The only thing that bothered me was the fact that I may have had to shoot a 14-year-old kid for no other reason than he may have been showing off. But I'd like to think that if I have had to, I would have. That was what I was there for.
The Armed Offenders Squad are ordinary police officers who prepare for the worst-case scenario. They come together for training, knowing they will be forced to make life-or-death decisions in a heartbeat. Simply doing their job could mean having to take a life, and making the wrong decision could bring death to the innocent, a squad mate, or even themselves. Dave Hazlitt and Derek Webb know the score.
Our intelligence section had information about an Australian, a top Australian crim that was living in the Herne Bay area, and he was very dangerous and armed. And the decision made was that rather than appeal, it'd be best to do a covert entry into the premises and capture him while he was still in bed.
3 squad members silently entered the flat to take the offender by surprise.
We were armed with .357 Magnums. And as we went into the living room, there was a figure on the couch, and this figure reached down and picked up a long-barreled object and started to bring it up and point it in our direction.
On a Christchurch call-out, Dave Hazlitt had a similar moment when he was confronted by a man with what looked like a gun.
I had my .357 Magnum pointed at his face from a couple of metres away, and he was making moves like he was going to bring this firearm up. I would have killed him without a doubt.
As you squeeze the trigger on those weapons, the barrel rotates and makes a bit of a clicking sound. Very, very faint, but just a clicking sound. I could hear these 3 revolver barrels starting to turn, which meant that trigger pressure was coming up. One of us hit the light switch with our elbow. Wrong flat. The person on the couch was an old man who was sleeping on the couch. He thought his house was being broken into. He'd reached out to pick up his walking stick to defend himself with.
All of a sudden, the dog handler was there. The dog just roared past me and attacked him. Turned out he had a lump of wood. I believe that he wanted me to believe that it was a firearm. If he'd pointed at me, I would have shot him. It would have been another pull chase shooting.
Whatever the offender does, you have to manage. In some cases, they do orchestrate their own demise, whether they shoot themselves or they place themselves at risk of being shot by the police.
As the 1980s wore on, the squads nationwide were attending hundreds of call-outs every year. Steve Rudsdale was acting as coverman for a dog handler as they tracked an armed offender across Whangarei farmland at night.
I was pretty new and thinking, yeah, this is pretty scary, because I was, the dog handler's the one man in the front, but I'm right behind him, you know, and in our tracking team. He picked up a track, and we tracked through a few paddocks, through an orchard, came across some playing cards. And we could see footprints. Obviously, it was pretty dark. But we kept finding these playing cards. And then 10 metres on, we'd find another card. And we found, I think, about 3 or 4, maybe 5 cards, just in one paddock, you know. It wasn't as if it was a full deck or anything. But, yeah, it was enough to make us think, you know, that perhaps this guy wants us to follow him. Is this guy going to ambush us, you know? Heard the sound of someone climbing over a fence, you know, the wire pinging. A muzzle flash and a large bang and hit the deck pretty smartly.
No one was hit, and despite the danger and very real risk of being ambushed, the men pushed on.
As it turned out, after he'd fired the shot, he continued running through the paddocks and actually went back to his house where he was apprehended. It was a good result in the end, but it was certainly one that the policeman could have been shot quite easily.
In tense situations, some squad members find that the best coping mechanism is humour.
There is a survival aspect, a part of it. It's actually, I think that filters all the way through the police when you've got the humour and the black humour, and particularly in serious situations, some of the worst humour comes out, but it actually alleviates the stress of the moment.
Many a time that you've been at a call out in the middle of the night, the voice appeal's not worked, so often it just comes down to getting the offender's attention by throwing something on the roof.
Grapefruit through the window at 2 o'clock in the morning, bound to get most people's attention.
You'd always be able to identify which house there'd been an AOS call out at. Be the one with all the fruit on the roof, or the kids' toys, or the firewood or something.
The offender was holding 22 bullets in a pair of pies and banging them with a hammer and setting them off all over the place. When we called in the house and finally did a voice appeal and called him out, he came out and he jumped up on a swimming pool fence, and the power lines where they went into the side of the house, he grabbed hold of them and he was threatening to come any closer, or, I'm going to put these in my mouth. And it was funny, it was comical in the end, because I think it was a telephone wires he was putting in his mouth. But yeah, he was a little bit loose.
We would be training with CS gas, tear smoke, and you'd finish, pack up the gear, go home, dump the gear in or near the laundry, and the wife would do the washing the next day. And of course, as she's putting it in there and stirring things up, but she'd come out suffering from tear smoke. My wife threatened me with physical violence. If I ever stuck that dirty, filthy gear out again to be washed, there'll be trouble. Yeah, she went crook on occasions.
The boss would always start a debrief by saying, look, the first thing is there's not to be any tear gas thrown during the debrief. And so you'd actually, during the debrief, you'd always have your hand on your gas mask, because you know at some stage it's someone's going to throw some tear gas into the middle. And then normally halfway through one of the briefings, you'd hear the can hit the ground and the hiss of the gas leaving. And the boss would be cursing someone who'd let it off, because inevitably he wouldn't have a gas mask, so he'd be the first off.
When they were first established, the squads had set up in the major centres, but it was soon apparent that the provinces like Nelson, Northland, Hawke's Bay needed an AOS presence. Isolated from their big city counterparts, the provincial squads often felt undermanned or under-equipped, but they quickly learned to make do with what they had. Sid Edgerton's West Coast squad had one of the longest beats.
Our region was like from Auckland to Wellington in length, and you had 7 guys to cover it. And on a good day, we were lucky if we could muster 5 blokes for a call-out. Sometimes we'd be away with 3 or 4.
Normally where you'd have 2 people on a cordon, if you didn't have them, you had to get by with 1.
I did actually venture in and was going to do some sergeant exams, and I sat down to this paper and they said, you're a sergeant and such, and you've got this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy to go and deal with the situation. I looked at it and I thought, well, shit, I'd send half them home. Too many staff, I don't know what to do with them all. And because you got by, you know.
The only issue was the wet weather gear. It still defies me to this day that you can trial wet weather gear and give it to somebody in Auckland.
You know, what's suitable in the dry comforts of the city. Just cut the mustard on the wee bit of drizzle we used to get on the coast.
If you were lying on the ground, it actually absorbed water like a big sponge. It was hopeless stuff, hopeless.
They might have seen themselves as the poor cousins, but the call-outs the rural squads attended were no less dangerous. Sid Edgerton's squad was pursuing a gunman who had abducted his 9-month-old daughter from its mother when they cornered him in a cul-de-sac.
The guy got out of the vehicle and he was standing in this cul-de-sac and he had the 9-month-old child held across his chest, and he had the double-barreled shotgun in his left. Sort of wasn't pointed threateningly or anything at that stage. It was just held down, and I'm standing there sort of caught cold right out in the open, and I thought, well, not much of an option here. So I just picked the weapon up, lined up on the end of his nose with the crosshairs, and I'm looking through the scope thinking, rifle in the town, built up area, this is going to be a bit dodgy.
We were yelling at him, appealing for him to put the kid down, put the shotgun down, and he was taking no notice of us. And he sort of started waving it up towards the OC, who was tucked behind a pole over to my right. And I'm looking at him thinking, well, if that points right at him, I'm not going to be left with too much option here. And at that stage, the dog handler had released his dog, and he was a big dog, big German Shepherd, very angry one. And he was charging straight for this guy, and I thought, oh no, because police dogs attacking people, you know, they just go straight for the front. And I thought, this dog's just going to jump up there, and this poor bloody baby's going to get ripped to bits by a very angry German Shepherd. And so that's running through my mind. I'm thinking, God forbid. To this day yet, no one knows, no one can work out why. But old Drum, the dog that was doing the attack, he peeled off to one side and come round and come straight in behind this guy and latched straight into his hamstring. With that, the guy sort of dropped the shotgun. That gave us the opening, and yeah, suddenly we were able to subdue him, get the weapon clear, get the child clear, and yeah, fantastic result.
Call-outs in towns and cities across the country meant the squad's exploits were becoming well known. But away from the public eye, a highly secretive arm of the AOS, the anti-terrorist squad, was training to deal with the very worst international incidents.
There were a lot of incidents happening around the world. Terrorism, airplanes getting blown up, hostages shot. The powers that be suddenly realised that we weren't prepared. New Zealand wasn't prepared for that sort of incident taking place here. And it was decided that the police would form an anti-terrorist squad, as it was known in those days, ATS. Certain members were selected from AOS and sent for specialist training. And the training I went through was as a sniper. And at that time, there were 6 of us throughout New Zealand who went and did the course with the army and spent 2 months training as snipers. The other part of the team were obviously the assault teams, and they were trained through various different people on assault techniques and special tactics and what have you.
The first real terrorists the ATS dealt with were the French spies charged with bombing the Rainbow Warrior in 1985.
Major Alain Maffar and Captain Dominique Prieur arrived at court amid heavy security.
On this occasion, the ATS simply acted as bodyguards. But in 1986, with no international terrorists in sight, the anti-terrorist squad was sent into action on the lawless East Cape.
These Rastas, they were living in the bush from Gisborne, right in land from Gisborne. And they'd been operating, planting, cannabis. They had cannabis farms in there, and, quite a big way. And they'd upset the farmers they'd go down to the beach to get seafood and that, and would just cut the fences and walk through. That's how it all started. And then they killed a fella. They cut a guy, a Rasta's head off, and put him down a big well. And the body was in the well. And that's how we came to hear it. So Gisborne asked us to come up and to help out. So we went up there and we took an Iroquois helicopter for the Air Force. And we spent a small week just, with the helicopter going over the whole area. Of course, the gangs went to ground, and you couldn't find them in the bush.
Drama began here in the early hours of Tuesday morning when armed police surrounded this hut in which 3 fugitives were sleeping. While they were trying to talk them into giving themselves up, they seized a policeman as a hostage, took his firearm, and rode off into the bush. They haven't been seen since.
One of the Gisborne AOS was taken hostage by the Western They took him along on horseback into the mountains kind of thing. And that was a situation when I was called in.
I'm not sure. We don't know where. When you talk they were in there, whether they were in the area that we'd searched for first time, I'm not sure.
Taking the ATS up there, we had more equipment. They had far more equipment than the standard AOS. Being able to get a hold of the Air Force with the helicopter was a huge advantage to get through there. The guys would take a section and land them somewhere, and they would, sort of patrol through the bush, looking for signs, looking for anything. And by then, they'd release the police officer. But, we still had to find the 4 who were the main offenders.
How do you see the situation being resolved? A shootout, perhaps?
No, hopefully not.
the media were on our backs, you know, so why haven't you caught them, and you know, what are you doing?
The cost of this operation is going up and up and up. How much longer do you think it can be kept up?
That's not my problem. That's a problem for my superiors.
But the pressure soon came on TAF and the ATS as headquarters issued a deadline, 48 hours to find the rusters or be forced to withdraw empty-handed.
The locals had all come out supportive of the rasters initially, but then as the police pressure came on, they were sort of telling us, you know, why don't you go and look up here? Well, they're probably down there, you know. And then on Saturday afternoon, we caught one. We picked another one up on Saturday evening, and we picked one up on Sunday morning.
But by midday Sunday, with only hours till deadline, one armed offender was still on the run in Ruatoria.
Just after lunch on the Sunday, they saw the fourth guy. So we got the four of them just before we flew back, which was really satisfying.
Success. But the ATS were yet to be truly tested under fire. Their chance came soon enough.
You're just constantly waiting for that shot to ring out. It was like a sniper's paradise.
By the late 80s, the elite section of the Armed Offenders Squad, the Anti-Terrorist Squad, had emerged from the shadows. When the Commonwealth Games came to New Zealand, it was the job of this highly specialised team to ensure security was tight.
For all of '89, we did a lot of preparation, a lot of training for the Commonwealth Games. So we were away 1 week per month for the whole of 1989 and doing training for that.
Peter and I were both anti-terror squad members in those different cities, and we would meet up, say, whenever there was some national training, we'd meet up and do the national training together. And so that was pretty unusual to actually have your brother on the squad too, and that was great.
We got a new batch of MP5s. And so once again, you had the, pretty much the latest technology in terms of weapons. I never in my wildest dreams thought that the New Zealand Police had any sort of capability like this. So that was a real eye-opener, but also very sobering in the fact that I had so much to learn.
The Games and later VIP visits passed without incident, but the Anti-Terrorist Squad were about to face their greatest test.
I was the shift inspector in town, and I was in control. 3 to 11 was the shifts. And the news, we always had a TV up in control, and you watch the news, and this came up.
10-year-old girl and a 62-year-old man are in Dunedin Hospital tonight. They were shot by a man who police say has gone berserk with a gun in the small township of Aramoana, about 20 kilometres from the city. They say a local house has also been set on fire.
I was at home and it come on TV. I said to my wife, I said, we should be down there. And within an hour of that, we got a phone call.
The telephonist just put out a call. Would any ATS members call the telephonist? So I gave her a ring, and she said, "Oh, there's a call out for ATS." And I said, "Are you sure it's ATS and not AOS?" And she said, "No, it's definitely ATS call out." And we'd never had an ATS call out before. I'd never been the subject of an ATS call out.
Shortly after, the ambulances started bringing out the first victims.
We got there approximately midnight on arrival in Dunedin.
Police used the time to organise their forces and worry about a colleague they feared was among the victims.
We learned that one of the local sergeants, Stu Guthrie, had been killed, and obviously other people within the little township had been killed as well. So this was really something quite serious.
Christchurch ATS members knew this massacre was the biggest test they'd ever faced. But without their Wellington reinforcements and without night vision gear, all they could do was sit tight and wait until morning.
By dawn, police were expecting more action, and they got it. When their helicopter made its first flight over Aramoana, it drew more shots from the gunmen. Daylight had not brought an end to the horror.
The Wellington team, they arrived about mid-morning, late mid-morning.
The briefing was a bit of a mess because nobody really knew much about Aramoana. The locals had all come out. The police had got them out the night before, and we talked to them, and some of them said, "Look, as soon as you guys front up, he'll just go down, he'll lie down and cry, you know. And others said, oh, he's got all sorts of military weapons and he'll shoot all you guys.
The Commissioner of Police had arrived, the Minister of Police had arrived. You know, there was police everywhere and, you know, everyone was on edge.
The Commissioner and the Minister of Police were sort of keen that we should get forward. News media were all sitting around, what are you going to do about it?
Then we loaded ourselves into some vehicles and drove in the long shingle road all the way into Aramoana.
And then our job was to search each home. As that were done, the armed offenders would cordon the block. So therefore you could more or less grid search the village.
We put snipers up on top of the hill, which is about 800 yards away. But with their telescopic sights, they could see the whole village and see the fires that he had lit. Their briefing was to see if they could find him.
You're feeling pretty vulnerable just walking through pretty much open country. So it was a real relief to get in amongst the trees.
You cannot operate invisibly, you know. So you'll use what there is. Trees, ditches, houses, whatever you think will give you cover and sufficient time to move quickly so that someone won't be able to get a bead on you.
The plan was formulated there that we'd go and clear Gray's Batch first.
As we moved forward, we came across some of the bodies, you know, some of the people that had been shot.
We could see the dead bodies on the ground and we could see the kids in the back of the ute. Once again, that was just very sobering. I was thinking, we're just going to have to be really, really careful, you know, in terms of patrolling through and keeping our drills as tight as we possibly could.
Well, I don't think anybody was scared. I think training took over. You're just doing what you had to do. You weren't thinking on, oh, what's going to happen here, or you know, how am I going to do this, where am I going to go? Anyone who's in a situation, if your child falls off the wharf in front of you, you don't think, what am I going to do? You just jump in.
So we patrolled through a couple of properties to get to Gray's Batch.
We went into this house because the door was open, and I remember the lounge had low windows. If you looked out the window, you could see Gray's house, which was only 100 yards away, just straight opposite. There was one guy obviously dead lying in the lounge. There was somebody else sitting under the table with his legs sitting up like this, just sitting under the table against the wall. So I called to him, and I didn't want to be too noisy because I didn't know where Gray was. And so I crawled around the room, and when I got, a few yards away from him, I could see that he'd been shot and he was dead, but he just slumped up against the wall. And that was quite disturbing, this poor old guy, yeah. So anyway, there was nothing we could do about that. You sort of felt you should cover them up, or why aren't we getting these bodies removed or something, but we couldn't. We just had to move on.
The men prepared to enter David Gray's house, knowing he'd already killed a dozen people in cold blood.
And then we crossed the road and just got to the bushes right in front of his property, and I just fired some tear gas rounds into his place. And we just waited for any reaction. There was no reaction. And then the next thing was to do an entry, so we just used some stun grenades and threw them in first, and then went in through the door and started to clear his place.
I thought he'd done a murder-suicide, as I was convinced that someone who'd done such horrendous things couldn't live with themselves.
But Gray was nowhere to be found.
Once we cleared that and found that he wasn't there, we thought, OK, we just got to knuckle down, and the next thing we're going to do is start to clear the whole town.
Aramoana is a small settlement, but the gunmen could be anywhere. The squads would have to move street by street, house by house, until they found Gray.
What we tried to do was get one group ahead quickly while we covered him. And the snipers were covering from the top. And they would check the next house out, and we were just moving from house to house like this.
We found Stu Guthrie, and once again very sobering, even more sobering than seeing the other bodies. And so we saw him in his police uniform there, and that really just hardened our resolve.
That was quite disturbing.
Sergeant Stu Guthrie went into Aramoana armed with a .38 against a man with an AK-47. He put himself in a position very, very early in the piece, totally in harm's way to protect the public, and he got killed for that.
It just made us pick our game up even more. You're just constantly waiting for that shot to ring out, and there was a lot of cover for Gray to use. There was the sand dunes, there was bushes and trees and outbuildings, and just the whole place was just as someone said, it was like a sniper's paradise, and it really was.
With Gray still at large, the men had no option but to carry on with the painstaking process.
We searched 29 houses.
It was very stressful, very tiring.
In all honesty, I think our jaws started to slip. We became casual and probably too relaxed, because you just can't keep up operating at that level all the way through.
It was starting to get late, you know, it was getting towards 6 and it was this night upon us. What are we going to do now?
I think we were only about halfway through all the houses in Aramoana. I was pretty sure we were going to have to do this again the next day if we hadn't found them.
The very next house, we found another house with the window smashed.
We went forward to this window, and my team leader told me to throw a stunny against this window. So I threw the stunny against the window, and it immediately bounced out onto the ground. We went back around the corner, and he told me to clear the rest of the glass out. From within, there was just this huge amount of fire just came boom, 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 straight down towards my head. My team leader was on my shoulder, and he just returned fire straight back into the window, still unseen. The curtains are still pulled. We're just absolutely stoked that we had our man.
Next week.
If he'd just come out and put his hands in the air, no matter what he'd have done, no matter how much loathing you had for him, you could not shoot him.
The AOS enter the 90s with casualties.
It was really frightening. If he sees me, he's going to shoot me.
And drug-crazed crims run the squads off their feet.
Drug abuser, armed, fires shots, is mobile. We needed to bring it to an end.
As the men and women of the Armed Offenders Squad put themselves in the line of fire. Since 1964, the Police Armed Offenders Squad have been the last line of defence when lives are under threat.
A lot of what the AOS do probably goes unrecognised.
As violent crime surged in the 70s, the squads would be tested under fire time and again in the very worst situations.
I'd be a liar if I said at the time I wasn't terrified.
In the 80s, the anti-terrorist branch of the squad came out of the shadows.
I got exposed to things that I never thought I'd ever get exposed to in the police force.
In November 1990, the anti-terrorist squad played a deadly game of cat and mouse, not against a foreign terrorist, but in Otago's tiny seaside town of Aramoana, against a man named David Gray.
You're just constantly waiting for that shot to ring out. It was like a sniper's paradise. From within, there was just this huge amount of fire just came boom, 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 straight down towards my head. My team leader was on my shoulder, and he just returned fire straight back into the window. There was fire going both ways past me. I just pulled away as quickly as I could down to the edge. I didn't even look for any holes. I just knew that I was okay. I was great, and I felt great. We were just absolutely stoked that we had our man.
Roger, just keep your hands down.
I went round to the front with Ash, and we just held on the front doors of this place about 12 metres out on the boundary.
Fired into the house, fired high to keep him down. The idea, hopefully there was no one else in the house, so I fired high. Let him know that we were here. He wasn't gunning down women and kids.
Come out, David! Please!
Then Pete and I called on him to come out.
You know, put your weapon down, and that's part of our call. So that was done, you could hear this call going on.
By this stage, I'd thrown some tear gas in, we had a gas mask on, and we were yelling out to him to come out, and eventually he did, he came out the front door.
If he'd just come out and put his hands in the air, no matter what he'd have done prior to that, you couldn't shoot him. No matter what you thought, no matter how repulsive, no matter how much loathing you had for him, you could not shoot him.
He came to the front door, and unlike the movie, he sort of just slinked out the door. And I sort of describe it like a rat leaving a ship, you know, just trying to slink out.
Oh, please, drop your weapon!
I wasn't even sure, and this is how bizarre it seems, I wasn't even sure this was the right guy. And how bizarre is that? I couldn't see the gun for a start off, and then as he turned, he had the gun on the inside between him and the door as he slunk out of the door. Straight away, I called on him, yelled out, "Stop, police," and straight away he just started bringing his gun up, shooting towards us.
We opened up on him and he was shot 5 times and he dropped. And then he started screaming, "Kill me, effing kill me."
Kicked his weapon away and then just tried to apply the handcuffs.
And I pointed my weapon, which is a MP5 machine gun, at his head. And I seriously thought about killing him for a second. But I didn't, because I'm not a murderer.
Roger, we have the offender. He has been injured. It's quite serious.
He was still struggling, and it was a real effort. You know, we were kicking him and trying to subdue him to get the handcuffs on, and finally we got the handcuffs on.
He'd been shot in the head, and there was blood everywhere, and there was mucus all over his hand. And he pulled his hands out of the handcuffs. He must have been extremely strong.
The Iroquois arrived pretty quickly with medical staff on board, and he received medical treatment really quite quickly.
He died at the scene.
After such a harrowing 24 hours, the ATS squads walked back out of the village.
As we walked out, along the road, a lot of the people had come forward to get back into their houses, and they sort of lined the road, and we sort of walked through the middle of them, and they clipped us. Yeah. I thought, how strange.
I just went home and tried to put it out of my mind. Everyone has dealt with numerous situations. You have to move on. You can't dwell on it. If you dwell on it, then you're finished.
The next morning I got up quite early, and my youngest boy was the only one still at school. He was at high school. And I was at the kitchen table. I was reading the paper, I was reading through all this stuff. And he comes out, and I thought, you know, what am I going to tell him? Because he'll want to know about these things. So he grabbed his lunch, which was in the fridge, and he went to the door, and then he said, "You could have been killed there. What about us?" He walked out. I thought, he's probably right. Yeah, and that sort of made me think about being in the squad, and I thought, shit. Then you start thinking about things like that, you know, which you don't. You don't ever think you'll get hurt. None of us ever thought we'd get shot. You know, why would we get shot?
Armed offenders squad call-outs don't need to have a high death toll to be devastating. The West Coast's Ken Foreman recalls one offender trying for suicide by cop.
Jimmy was going to go out in a blaze of glory. He had the 2 firearms, the 800 rounds, and yeah, the next thing I see is Jimmy Malone coming over the back fence at the property. There was a horse paddock, and round the outside of it, it had a fence. And with all this gear that Jimmy was carrying, I knew that he would have to stop at that fence and put something down to get over it. He got to the fence. And then he climbed over, and that was when we challenged him.
Police!
If he reached for either of those firearms, then it was going to happen.
Back away! Back away!
That is as close as I've ever come or ever want to come to pulling the trigger. That's when it all sort of started. I started to get the shakes. And I thought I'd lost my bottle. I thought, you know, you've got to leave the squad. You're no good to them anymore if you're going to do this. You know, it was only very brief. It was probably only for 5 minutes. And then I was as good as gold. But I really thought that I'd lost my bottle. It scared me. It scared me that I'd reacted that way, and I reacted in a way that I didn't understand. Every time I think of that wee fence, I think it saved Jimmy Malone, and it certainly saved me. And Jesse and I, when we were driving back to Greymouth, we went back together. And Jesse looked at me and he said, "You could have shot him." I said, "Yes, Jesse, I could have. But you and I wouldn't be driving back to Greymouth right now. We would be hauled off somewhere until we were interviewed." I said, "We can do without that. We need to get back and have a couple of beers."
Land across the other side of the road here. At the back of the address is a large football field and park.
From the beginning, the Armed Offenders Squad was male-dominated. In the mid-90s, Sasha Haskell became one of the first females to join the squad. Seeking a new challenge, the former territorial soldier and national rep footballer arrived at the police college for her AOS selection course.
Fortunately, because I had been in the army, there was a little bit of street cred, I suppose, having done something that was actually, on the face of it, a lot more regimented and military than the AOS is.
And people like Sasha and a number of others have proved that they're more than capable.
There were some women constables that were just outstanding and left the blokes in the shade. And there were some policemen who were outstanding, you know, I mean, just all people. It didn't make any difference.
I was physically smaller than everyone else, so I'd always end up sort of getting pushed into ceilings and through little manholes and things like that. So I sort of ended up sort of playing that kind of role. So they sort of like, "Oh, where's Sasha? We'll just chuck her up there."
When you've got a female offender, it's certainly nice to have a female officer dealing with her.
A lot of the gang places that we'd go to, there'd be females there, so even though I was in total black and no one would know that I was a woman, I kind of ended up looking after females. Just was an added protection, so if there was accusations later on about, you know, inappropriate behaviour, it kind of took that out of the equation. There's one squad room and everyone gets changed in there, so unfortunately for them they got to see me in my underwear, but not for long. Like, everyone was sure not to look at me. I was sure that I didn't look at them. You know, the overalls weren't really conducive to the female anatomy, so you'd be dying to go to the toilet, and the zippers sort of have a zipper at the top and a zipper at the bottom, so you'd have to get almost completely naked to go to the loo. So if you're a boy, it's sort of a little bit easier.
His girlfriend had warned them he had a gun and ammunition and that he was unstable.
One of the most dangerous jobs on the squad is searching buildings and facing offenders on their own patch, as the Christchurch squad was reminded on an August morning in 1991.
The information was that there is a person with a gun in like a big two-storey bedsit place. And our brief initially was to do the cordon contain, and I got positioned in a house right next door to where the offender's bedroom was supposed to be.
We went up the stairs, made sure the hallway was clear, and the offender was located in the room.
Instead of cordoning the whole house, knowing that there was numerous little bedsits within there, just to cordon just that one room. So that was their brief, and they went up.
There was voice appeal made to the offender, which he refused to answer. And after a period of time, I got the instruction, stuff it, Ash, kick the door in. And then went to the left-hand side of the door and peered through. And I just exposed the smallest part of my body as I could, which was my hands and part of my face. And then I was shot with a shotgun
All I heard over the radio was Ash had been shot and they couldn't recover him, and I thought he'd been killed. And like Ash was a close friend of mine.
I'd been shot in the face. It was just like being smacked with sort of a hammer. I then attempted to shoot the offender, but I couldn't because my revolver was jammed with pellets, but also both my hands were split open. And then another shot fired. Then a big hole appeared in the hallway wall. And I thought, oh, shit, he's just going to come out here and shoot me now. Because I was virtually defenceless. Someone threw tear gas in, but of course I had no mask, so I was coughing up tear gas and bleeding. My hands didn't work.
The offender had jumped out the side window, so he was caught by our guys further down on the back or in the backyard of this property, so that was all taken care of. So I came down from the house and came out to see what I could do to help Ash.
I actually went to a window and yelled out to get me a ladder. I did actually swear at the time. I think it was get me an effing ladder. Well, they didn't get me an effing ladder. Well, they assisted me down the stairs, where I very romantically chundered on the footpath.
I was pretty shot up in the face and shot up in the hands, and myself and another one of the guys just joined up and we just carried him down the road to the ambulance.
Constable Ashton's hand caught most of the blast, but 3 pellets hit him in the head. One went through his throat and lodged near his spine. He was okay, but it was a close call.
I got this one for being shot, and I got this one for shooting at someone, so I can tell you it's better to give than receive.
Our top story, a huge police operation on the Coromandel Peninsula in the hunt for 4 dangerous prisoners on the run. The 4, 2 of them convicted murderers, escaped from Auckland's medium security prison at Aramoana on Monday night.
In 1998, a very high-profile call-out brought the Armed Offenders Squad onto TV screens throughout the nation. Operation Escape, seeking 4 dangerous escapees from Paramoremo, saw AOS teams from all over the North Island descend on the town of Tairua. The camouflage looks military, but they're not soldiers. These men are police officers. For 2 decades, this unit was known as the Anti-Terrorist Squad, but in the early 90s became the Special Tactics Group. The name change was because their job was now much broader than guarding against terrorism. For many AOS members, joining the STG is the pinnacle of their career.
To be asked to join their group was quite an honour. I got exposed to things that I never thought I'd ever get exposed to in the police force.
They asked if I was interested in joining the STG, and I had no idea what the STG was, so I said yes, absolutely, that's what I'm here for. I'd love to join the STG.
In Tairua, the STG worked alongside armed offenders squads. Their training and tracking saw them sent deep into the rugged hills of the Coromandel.
There was a lot of bush walking to do and clearing, and every single report that came through in regards to Taylor and his group would be handed to us, and each unit would be sent off, whether by vehicle, by helicopter, or by foot.
Let's make no bones about it. The individuals concerned were violent criminals. You know, they were a serious threat to the community.
They had been disturbed in this address just slightly south of Tairua in a very, very lovely home.
Because we didn't know if the offenders were in there or whether they'd left, we knew there were firearms involved. The decision was made to put a tight cordon in around the building, wait for some daylight so we could see better, and then start voice appealing where we could control things better. And as the sun was coming up, another guy and I were crouched at the level of the concrete, and in front of us there was an object 3 or 4 feet away sitting on the concrete. And as the light came up, it sort of came into focus and we were both staring at it, and then we could see a wire running out of it, heading off towards the house like a bomb, and all night we'd been sitting there with it right next to us. So we sort of tapped the boss on the shoulder and said, hey, look at that.
We had to put AWS staff between the bomb tech and the house, and I guess I was one of the new guys, and that was me.
It was a long day, no food, really hot, stuck out exposed in your black gear with your ballistic helmet and your armour on, so it's a pretty long day.
They had taken firearms from the house, they'd broken into the firearms safe, and when we saw later in the bedroom where they'd actually got a hacksaw and sawn the barrels off some of the weapons, and the barrels and all the filings were all sitting on the floor in the bedroom of one of these houses. So that sort of heightened the whole situation.
Police have just told us that they found guns and ammunition on a beach near this luxury hideaway house.
At first light, the squads made their move.
At low tide, we walked around the rocks to the area where they had last been seen, and then we deployed. I looked ahead up into the scrub, and there was something there that just was out of place. And I scoped, and then I realised it was a person, and when I challenged him, he put his head up, and I knew it was Arthur Taylor. Handcuffed him, and then we proceeded down the hill. He looked pretty tuckered, I would have to say. I think he'd been in the bush for a day or two, and he looked pretty buggered to me.
The 3 remaining prisoners were recaptured over the next few days, and Tairua returned to normal. Armed offenders' call-outs have always been a media magnet. But by the mid-90s, as news reporting got faster, often the first information from the front line to the wives at home came via the TV.
The drama at the police station caught the quiet Waikato farming town by surprise just after lunch. As the siege unfolded, armed police converged on Morrinsville from all over the Waikato region.
The one time that I really feared for him was the Morrinsville shooting.
That was one of those jobs that you just knew it was the real thing. The situation was bizarre, if you like, a kidnapping and a hostage-taking in a police station.
You're holding 7 people.
That's right.
Have you got a gun?
Explosives.
What kind of explosives?
Explosives. All right, just take it like that.
The Homes program had been contacted by Larry Hammond, and so the phone line in and out of the Morrinsville police station was locked to the Homes program.
He's busy wiring up explosives at the moment.
Do you know this fellow, Larry?
I've only spoken to him once. He's claiming that microchips were put into his head and has been suffering electrical shock treatment ever since. He's got a crossbow in his hands at the moment.
When we called in the building, I was a sniper or a marksman on the squad, so I'd picked a fire escape looking down on the police station, and I remember thinking, I wonder if this guy's got the arms safe open. It was a logical thing, you know, there's a police station there, there's weapons there, has he got the safe open, and could he be lining me up with a rifle? And I moved because I felt too exposed.
Get away, get away, get away!
Oh, my heart just sank, and I just thought, oh, because they said that someone had been shot and that a police officer had been hurt. And I knew it was their squad that had gone to the call-out because it's their area.
Everybody here? Everyone's out, all right?
Real fear it was, actually. I really did start to feel a bit panicky when I heard what had happened. And within probably 5 minutes of hearing that breaking news, he phoned me and said, "Don't worry, it wasn't me."
The offender was shot. A police officer was shot by the offender with a crossbow bolt. When the scene examination was done, the explosive devices were capable of detonating. So it was, a serious situation.
Family man and Auckland squad commander Tim Masters has dealt with many call-outs in his time, but one in particular is burnt in his memory.
My granddad.
Your granddad?
Yes, shot my brother.
Your granddad has shot your brother?
Yes, and I think he's going to shoot me.
Linda had secreted herself in a cupboard at the family house, and she'd heard Brian Schlafer come looking for her, and she had the presence of mind to hide, and she'd also got onto the phone.
Where's Granddad?
I don't know, he's probably pissing us.
He's probably
looking for me.
He's either looking for your mum or he's looking for you.
So as the police AOS operation unfolded, they realised how serious the situation was as they came across bodies at different parts of the property. The problem was we didn't know where Brian Schlafer was. It was a priority to get Linda out of that house, you see, because they couldn't leave her in there because the possibility that Brian Schlafer would come across her and kill her.
By lunchtime, and still no sighting of Brian Schlafer, despite the police using infrared technology in the search.
If Brian Schlafer does hear any of this news broadcast, please contact us and let us know where we can make a safe approach to you.
Don't hang up the phone, leave the phone off, and you come back as soon as you can and see me. The grandfather has gone outside to try and kill the father who's working out in the garden somewhere. She hasn't seen him for about 15 minutes now.
I went out with 3 or 4 or 5 other members and a member of the St John ambulance at the time to get her and bring her out. We had deployed snipers out into the area, so we had cover when we went out there to get Linda back. And of course we had to be aware that he could be anywhere on the property. Your senses were certainly heightened. Behind any tree or building, he could be there, you see, so we were aware of that, and our tactics going out to the house had to take all that into consideration.
We've had 6 murders committed, and we're desperate that there's no more.
For Tim's wife Linda, hearing this tragedy play out live on air was very worrying.
It's on the radio, you're at work, and you've got half an ear on that, and for other people it's just another normal day at work, and you're thinking, oh yes, but, you know, is there going to be someone come home tonight or not?
Just stay where you are, all right?
Yeah.
Just listen to the instructions very, very carefully, all right?
Yeah.
Don't you unlock the door.
Yeah.
When we got her, and the relief on her face, definitely, you know, when, again, without emphasising what she had witnessed and had been through, yeah, we were just glad to get her out of there. Coming back out, our sniper at the time, Linda just stuck to him like glue. You know, you couldn't have put a cigarette paper between the two of them. Yeah, you could see what she perhaps witnessed and been through etched in her face.
Less than an hour later, it was all over. The gunman's body was found on the family farm. Brian Schlafer, suicide. His wife, 3 sons, daughter-in-law and grandson murdered. For the police, it was a massive operation of the saddest kind.
He comes home.
Hello.
He lay down in the doorway and went to sleep. And I knew that that was the mental stress of the day. So I just left him there to sleep, and eventually he woke up, go to bed as normal, and nothing said. But sometime in the middle of the night he'd wake up, and that's when he'd start talking about it. So you just learnt that there will come a time, and you wait for the time, you don't push it.
So much of the mental stress of being on the Armed Offenders Squad comes from a heavy responsibility borne by the members. The responsibility to make the right call every time. Sasha Haskell, Sid Edgerton and Derek Webb have all been painted into a corner by the actions of offenders.
It started here at 3:05.
Sasha's squad had been called to a domestic in Wainuiomata.
Police got a call a man was armed with a .22 pump-action rifle. Shots had been fired.
He said that he would come out of the house and shoot anyone that he saw, and that he was going to walk down to the police station and kill everyone in the police station. And there was a fence separating his house from where I actually was. I was with a colleague, and we were lying on the driveway. When you sort of looked through the fence, you could actually see in between gaps, and I just started to see him walking down. It was really frightening. You know, if he sees me, he's gonna shoot me.
Yeah, come on, boy.
On the West Coast, Sid Edgerton was called to back up a colleague being stalked by a gunman.
Come on, Chuck.
We came screeching around the corner, and the offender was walking up. We recognised him because we knew him before, and threw the old Commodore into neutral and just sort of dragged the handbrake on to let it slow down, and we bailed, me out one side, him out the other, and put a challenge into him to let him know we were armed police. He sort of brought his shotgun round towards me, and I had mine lined up on the back of his head at that stage. Everything just seemed to have slowed up.
Derek Webb found himself looking through his sniper's scope at a man threatening his squad with a rifle.
A number of emotions go through you. You're watching through the scope, you're watching his face, you know what he looks like, you know the actions he's going on about, you're watching his body movements, so there's a bit of, how can I put it, intimacy there.
You really have to assess every second on its own merits, because he may have very easily just dropped the rifle on the ground at any given moment. So you're constantly thinking about your justification.
Drop it!
It's just amazing how much the old brain's computing in seconds, or less than seconds. You know, it's just all happening, and it's all going, you know, I could see it all. Police officer shoot me in and back, and that would have been the sensational news item of the night. And it's going through your mind, and I'm thinking, well, there's no other option here.
He was then called on to drop the firearm, and he turned around. The police dogs were released on him, and he shot at one of them. The person sitting next to me did shoot him, and I didn't.
I had the safety off trigger being pulled as he pulled the shotgun back round and put it in his mouth and pulled the trigger, which was a pretty traumatic result.
Very, very quickly, in a matter of a split second, he pulled the rifle up and he took a shot at one of the guys. And fortunately, he missed. But he reloaded and started to take aim, and so it was necessary at that stage to take the shot. We went forward, we obviously tried to give him first aid, we called up an ambulance, and rather unfortunately, he died.
He has been shot. Repeat, he has been shot. Can I get an ambulance there immediately? Over.
It was something that I played over in my mind over and over and over again. I probably felt at the time that I'd failed in some respect.
Did I do the right thing? Could I have done this in a less violent manner?
And it was something, actually, that I thought I was going through on my own. But I spoke to a couple of people that had actually fired. They said, oh, I felt like a failure. And I was like, wow, you know, they're going through exactly the same thought processes, but we did different things.
Luckily enough for me, it was just taken out of my hands at the last moment. Yeah, if he hadn't have done that and I'd squeezed the trigger, God knows what would have happened from there. Should have been a full-on investigation, and someone that has all day and every day for the next 2 years can make a decision as to whether or not I'd made the right decision in that much time.
After any fatal shooting, AOS members are investigated by homicide detectives, the coroner's court, and the Independent Police Conduct Authority.
Every shooting is treated like a normal homicide, and our members are subject to an enormous amount of investigating involving both the responsibility of the shooter, responsibility of the section as a wider group, and obviously the police operation that led to that call-out.
I had a discussion with my supervisor at that stage. I actually said to him, does this mean I'm off the team? And I think I voiced an opinion. If I'm off the team, I'll feel as though I've done something wrong.
It took a year and a half of investigation for Derek Webb to be cleared after firing that fatal shot.
So anybody that thinks, you know, that you live happily ever after one of those things is, you know, you're in limbo for quite some time. It is a world in which you don't know what's going to happen to you.
The intense media scrutiny after a shooting prompted members to pull on their balaclavas, less for the warmth than for their anonymity.
If I was in the unfortunate position to be involved in a shooting like that as the shooter, then I wanted to protect my identity and that of my family for as long as I could.
We did an operation on a gang pad. When we got in there and took over the place, in their living room they had a dartboard, and on the dartboard was, lo and behold, my photograph taken from a newspaper article. So in protecting your identity, you also protect your family's identity.
The balaclava also provides another way to protect life.
Balaclavas are intimidating, and there are times when you need to confront an offender and he needs to know that you mean business. Otherwise, there may be a different result.
If a police officer, regardless of what he's wearing, blue or black, if his presence is intimidating enough, that dominates the offender into giving himself up, surrendering, or doing as he's told, then you're halfway there.
Often at briefings you'd be told that this offender, there's no way the police will take him alive and he'll shoot the first cop he sees.
Please don't move!
When you dominate them and they're faced with guys in black gear pointing weapons at them, the bravado's just lost. They're not so brave.
If it's intimidating, no apologies.
But sometimes the covert approach is the most effective. One of the biggest local news stories of 2002 was the abduction of little baby Kahu. The 8-month-old girl was grabbed from outside her Lower Hutt home, launching a massive police search.
It gets increasingly more disheartening as time goes on.
To stack the odds in their favour, police employed the crack surveillance skills of the Special Tactics Group, sending them to the King Country on the strength of a tip-off from locals.
We'd managed to narrow it down to a house in Tamaranu.
We were involved in observation of an address for a couple of days, a property that we wanted to either rule in or rule out of the inquiry.
There was no sign, there was no noise coming from it, and the offender had gone away that next day. So we thought we can't wait around any longer.
Time was a critical factor, particularly when you're talking about a baby.
The decision was made that we needed to take some positive action to either confirm or deny that this property was involved or this person was involved.
Moving silently, the team entered the house.
Cleared through the kitchen. There's nothing there, then carried on clearing down through the hallway. We just came into this room that was lined with plywood. In one corner, here she was, baby Kahu, just sitting in a cot. And it was just overwhelming to see her there. And to see her, she was alive, the room was warm, she seemed good as gold.
You've probably never seen a bunch of blokes smile so broadly before, you know?
One job that really affected him was probably the baby Kahu story. A lot of the people involved thought that the baby would be dead, and so they were preparing themselves for that. And then the fact that they found her and she was alive, then that was fantastic.
I felt, quite a lot of emotion coming across me at that stage because I had kids myself. So the guy I was working with, he just whisked her out of the room, out the hallway, out the back door, and into a van, and they just took off.
And then it was sort of, okay, now what do we do? So we were kitted up and driving around with a little baby in the back. Got directed to the base hospital, and there's a couple of us sitting in the back with this little baby thinking, well, what do we do? We did thought, well, maybe we'll give her something to play with, but obviously don't generally carry things for kids on us, so gave her a glow stick which you break and got all sorts of chemicals inside it. And just as we gave it to her, we thought, well, hang on, maybe that's not the best thing to give a little girl, little baby. So we took that off her.
And we knew that the offender was probably likely to come back that late that afternoon or late that night, so we had to set up a plan to capture him.
A matter of hours afterwards, he was obviously unaware that the child had been recovered and returned back to the address, and we were waiting for him.
He was just monstered, face down on the ground, handcuffs applied, and that was it. Handed over to the CIB investigators and job done.
Another job resolved without a shot being fired. But with violent crime on the rise and a new drug culture sweeping the cities, the stakes are getting higher and higher. As the new millennium wears on, violent crime in New Zealand is constantly in the headlines. The job of policing in this country has never been more dangerous.
Having been overseas for the last sort of 5 or 6 years and coming back, New Zealand's incredibly violent.
The nature of the call-outs, the level of violence, the frequency of firearms and the unpredictability really of some of the offenders meant that some of the AOS tactics had to become more assertive, more aggressive if you like.
The chap in front of me, he would have been about 17, 18 years old. He had a box cutter, pulled the box cutter out, flicked the blade on, turned at us and decided he was going to have a go. And as opposed to shooting him, I decided to put the butt of the shotgun through his jaw, and it dropped him in a hurry. But you know, under those circumstances, you get about half a second to decide what you're going to do, and I chose not to shoot him.
Reasons for the increased violence are well documented. Although hidden P-labs were being raided as early as '99, now police are busting hundreds of labs per year in Auckland alone. This marks a new era for the AOS.
It's had a huge impact. Huge impact. You'll find labs out in the country these days, labs in industrial blocks, labs in homes where the kids are playing around. Most of the jobs the squads attend, P's a feature in there somewhere.
The methamphetamine, there's inevitably gang involvement, firearms are involved, so AOS are involved in the majority of operations.
The squads are now honing new skills and training to meet the changing demands of this dangerous new world.
Comply with our instructions and you will not be harmed.
These evolving tactics were tested on an Auckland motorway in 2005.
Leonard Hall, criminal, propensity for violence, drugs. Police patrol had tried to stop him earlier on. That ended up in a car chase.
Police followed him here to St Luke's shopping centre, where the man shot at a patrol car.
Fired shots at police with a high-powered semi-automatic rifle, and then he managed to carjack an Asian family.
We just headed out to the general area where the pursuit was going on, and we only referenced the media helicopter that was above it.
Drug abuser, armed, fires shots, has hostages, is mobile, is heading back in towards the city. We needed to bring it to an end.
We had to confront the offender, there was no other option. We were going to do that by way of non-compliant vehicle stop. It's just forcing the vehicle off the road and confronting the offender and giving him no option. The vehicle stopped. It was just lucky that we'd carried out that training with the armed offender squad only 2 or 3 days prior to that incident.
There was certainly a fair number of AOS cars involved, and in fact during the course of that chase he'd not only leant out the window and pointed that firearm at police members, he'd also fired shots at them as well.
He's leaning right out the back window and pointed directly at us. We fired a shot over, they carried on.
The motorway was completely clear. It had been blocked by the traffic units, so we were in a pretty good space to resolve it. As we got into position, the directive was given that sort of on a countdown that we would stop the vehicle.
And that's it. Now. Hall, by that stage, had bailed out of the vehicle.
He couldn't have got out of the vehicle any quicker or any closer to the ground, and that's the whole intention, is to sort of shock the offender.
Separated him from his gun, that was secure. The hostages were safe. Very much shaken up and traumatised by the whole event, but otherwise everything went according to plan.
In 2009, on the same stretch of motorway, the Armed Offenders Squad making headlines once again. The tragic shooting of a courier driver on Auckland's northwestern motorway was the first shooting of an innocent bystander in the squad's 45-year history. While investigations ultimately cleared the squad member of criminal negligence, the pressure on the AOS intensified. And while talkback radio was still running hot, the city of Napier was shut down for 3 days by a gunman killing a police constable and shooting up the neighbourhood.
Gunman Jan Molinar
According to a friend, he's well armed and prepared to die.
In the face of incredible public pressure, putting themselves in the line of fire on every operation, what drives these men and women to do this job?
Some people would just stand there and shake their heads and say, why? Look at the commitment that it's putting upon you in your job. Look at what it's asking of the family. It's doing right for good people. That's why I love doing the job. That's why I got out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning when the pager went off. That's why I was away for days on end at times.
How many other jobs can you say people will get out of the bed at 2 in the morning, spend 4 hours, and then go to work for the day?
This is the police.
They do it for love or they do it for service. They don't do it to get paid because they're not reimbursed for what toll that takes on someone's life, you know?
There's a lot of people that are alive today because of their actions. Not dead because of them, but alive because of them.
That must be the most successful armed response unit in the world in terms of the number of call-outs attended and had to resort to the ultimate force on very, very few occasions.
The police officer is there as an agent on behalf of the public at large, the community. And the responsibility at the end of the day has to be shared by the beneficiaries, and that is the public at large. We put them there, and that responsibility is ours, each and every one of us. It's not good enough for the public to put the whole blame, or whole responsibility, if you like, for a shooting or killing on the shoulders of the officer who pulled the trigger. The whole of the squad that was involved, the whole of the police service, and the whole of the community that's responsible for the police have to share that burden. It's a terrible burden. You can't just place it on one person's shoulders.